The government says inflation is 2.4%. Your grocery bill says otherwise. And here's the thing, you're both right, because inflation isn't one number. It's dozens of numbers, moving at different speeds, hitting different parts of the economy at different times. And the gap between those numbers is where the real story lives. Right now, beef prices are up over 20% since mid-2024. Coffee is up 15%. Electricity costs have climbed 8% in that same window. But housing inflation, which dominated headlines for 2 years, has quietly cooled back to 3.3%, almost exactly where it was before the pandemic. If you average all of that together, you get a tidy 2.4%, a number that describes almost nobody's actual experience. That's not a flaw in the measurement. That's a flaw in how we use the measurement. And understanding why inflation moves unevenly, why it ripples through the economy like damage spreading across a network instead of hitting everything at once, is one of the most underrated skills in personal finance. So let's break this open. The Consumer Price Index tracks prices across hundreds of categories, weighted by how much the average urban household spends on each one: food, shelter, transportation, medical care, energy. All of it gets bundled into a single number that policymakers, markets, and media treat as the inflation rate. But that headline number is a weighted average, and like all averages, it can hide more than it reveals. Think of it like a game where your character has a dozen different stats: health, stamina, armor, speed, and the game only shows you one combined power level. You could have maxed out armor and nearly zero health, and your power level would still look fine. The average obscures the vulnerability. That's what's happening right now. The overall inflation number looks manageable. But underneath, some categories are running hot while others are cooling fast, and those divergences create winners and losers in ways that a single number can never capture. Here's why the speeds differ. Inflation doesn't move through the economy like a wave hitting a flat beach. It moves more like water finding cracks in uneven terrain. Some prices respond to shocks almost immediately. Others take months or years to adjust, and the reasons come down to 3 structural factors: how exposed a sector is to the original shock, how quickly prices in that sector can adjust, and how much competition exists to absorb costs versus passing them through. Energy prices are the fastest movers. Oil gets repriced globally in real time based on supply and demand. When a disruption hits, a conflict, a production cut, a storm, gas station prices can shift within days. Food prices move next, but slower because there's a supply chain between the commodity and your plate. A drought in Brazil doesn't hit your coffee price for months. It has to work through shipping, roasting, packaging, distribution, and retail before you see it at the register. Then there's durable goods, appliances, cars, furniture. These are even stickier. Manufacturers have contracts, inventory buffers, and pricing strategies that delay pass-through. Right now, durable goods inflation is creeping up to about 2% after years of deflation, partly because pre-tariff inventory stockpiles from early 2025 are finally running out. The cost pressure was there all along. It just took time to surface. And then there's the slowest mover of all: services. Rent, healthcare, insurance, education. These prices are set by contracts, lease terms, regulatory frameworks, and labor costs that adjust on annual cycles at best. When wages go up, service prices follow, but with a lag measured in quarters, not weeks. That's why services inflation was still elevated long after goods inflation had already come back down. The shock had moved through the fast-responding sectors and was still working its way through the slow ones. This sequencing matters enormously, and almost nobody talks about it. Because when the Federal Reserve looks at inflation data to make interest rate decisions, they're looking at a snapshot that blends fast-moving and slow-moving components together. A hot reading might reflect a shock that already happened months ago, finally showing up in services. A cool reading might hide a new cost pressure building in goods that hasn't reached consumers yet. It's like trying to assess a battlefield by looking at a single composite score. The score might say stable, but one flank is collapsing while another is advancing. The average is meaningless without the composition. And this uneven movement creates a phenomenon economists call relative price distortion. When some prices rise much faster than others, it scrambles the signals that consumers and businesses use to make decisions. Normally, a price increase means demand is high or supply is constrained. It's information. But during uneven inflation, prices can rise simply because costs got pushed through from somewhere else in the chain. The signal gets noisy. Businesses overinvest in sectors that look profitable but are really just experiencing cost pass-through. Consumers shift spending away from categories with visible price increases toward categories where the increase hasn't arrived yet, not realizing it's coming. This is the hidden tax of inflation dispersion. Even if the average rate is moderate, the uneven distribution forces constant reallocation. You adjust your grocery habits because beef is up 20%, but you don't adjust your utility budget because electricity creeping up 8% doesn't trigger the same alarm. The slow bleed costs you just as much over time, but it flies under your perception threshold. And here's where it gets really interesting. The composition of inflation has quietly flipped. Through 2023 and 2024, services, especially housing, were the dominant driver. Goods prices were actually falling in many categories. But since late 2024, that pattern has reversed. Goods inflation is climbing again, driven partly by tariff effects working through supply chains and partly by commodity shocks like the Brazilian coffee harvest disruptions and extreme weather events. Meanwhile, services inflation is gradually easing as the labor market softens and housing catches up to the cooling that started in new lease prices 2 years ago. So the headline number barely moved, but the engine underneath completely changed. It's like a car maintaining the same speed while switching from the motor to coasting downhill. The speedometer reads the same, but the dynamics are entirely different, and one of those situations is a lot less sustainable than the other. This matters for your money in concrete ways. If you're making financial decisions based on the headline inflation number, whether that's negotiating a raise, choosing between fixed and variable rate debt, deciding when to make a large purchase, or just budgeting, you're operating with incomplete information. Your personal inflation rate depends on your specific consumption basket. A retiree spending heavily on healthcare and utilities is experiencing a fundamentally different inflation environment than a young renter spending on food and transportation. The Bureau of Labor Statistics actually tracks this. They publish detailed breakdowns by category, and the spread between the fastest and slowest moving components has been unusually wide since the pandemic. Before 2020, most categories clustered within a percentage point or two of each other. Now, you can have 20-point gaps between the hottest and coolest categories. That spread is the real story, not the average. And there's a compounding effect that makes this worse over time. Categories that experienced sharp price increases during 2021 and 2022, like used cars, which spiked over 40%, may show low current inflation or even deflation. But the price level never came back down. You're paying the inflated price, just not seeing further increases. So the year-over-year percentage calms down, which makes the average look better. But your actual cost of living has permanently shifted. It's a permanent debuff. The status effect icon disappeared from your screen, so you think it wore off, but your stats never actually recovered. The base effect masks the damage. This is why people feel like inflation is worse than the official number suggests. It's not that the measurement is wrong. It's that the measurement was never designed to describe your experience. It was designed to describe the economy's experience. And those are very different things. The practical takeaway here isn't to panic or to distrust official data. It's to read the data the way it's meant to be read, as a system-level indicator with components you can decompose. The headline number tells you the weather. The category breakdowns tell you whether to bring an umbrella or sunscreen. And right now, the forecast is uneven, cooling in some places, warming in others, with the mix shifting in ways that the single number actively obscures. If this kind of systems-level breakdown changes how you think about the numbers behind the headlines, consider subscribing to 8-Bit Economics. Every week, we strip complex financial systems down to their core mechanics. No hype, no predictions, just the underlying code. If it shifted your thinking, hit like and drop your take in the comments. By the time everyone sees it coming, the smart play is already over. Here's the uncomfortable truth to sit with. The Federal Reserve has one interest rate, one tool, applied uniformly across an economy experiencing wildly non-uniform inflation. It's like trying to balance patch a game by adjusting one global variable when the problem is class-specific. Raising rates cools housing and durable goods effectively because those are credit-sensitive. But it barely touches food prices driven by supply shocks or energy costs driven by geopolitics. The tool doesn't match the problem's shape. And every time policymakers wait for the average to hit their target, they're implicitly accepting that some sectors will be over-tightened while others remain undertreated. The average reaches 2%, and everyone declares victory. But underneath, the distortions are still running, the relative prices are still scrambled, and the people most exposed to the fast-moving categories are still absorbing costs that the headline number says don't exist. The map is not the terrain. And in an economy where inflation moves at different speeds through different channels, the single number we all obsess over might be the least useful piece of information available.